Hi, everyone. I think we can go ahead and get started. It's just a couple of minutes past. And I can just begin with kind of the framing and the introduction for our session today. So welcome. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We're really excited to begin this conversation or continue and build on this conversation about the ethical considerations involved in building an EIE knowledge base. I want to first introduce our panel of speakers today. Our first speaker will be Dr. Catherine Brun, who's the Lebanon Research Director for the ERICC Research Program, as well as the Deputy Director of Research for the Center for Lebanese Studies. And she will take us today through a reflection of a rapid research study that was conducted during active conflict in Lebanon and take us through the journey of kind of reflecting on the ethical context and the considerations that went into making many of the decisions in moving that research forward. We will also hear from Dr. Rabi Nasser, who is the Syria Research Director for ERICC, as well as I'm sorry, he's not a British Academy Bilateral Chair, that's just there by mistake, but he is the Syria Research Director for the ERICC program and will speak to the ethical challenges of conducting research in both the previous regime as well as in post-Assad Syria. We were meant to be joined by Jess Odie, who is the Director for the Design for Social Impact Lab, but unfortunately she is unable to make it today. But I will hope to touch base with her after the webinar and make sure to share any resources or presentations that she might have wanted to present today. And so hopefully you will still have access to some of that thinking, some of the resources that go into the kind of participatory ethical research approach that Design for Social Impact Lab takes. Our moderator and discussant for today will be Dr. Ritesh Shah, who is a senior lecturer for critical studies and education at the University of Auckland and has been one of the leading voices in this conversation of ethics in EIE. And I'm very grateful and we're very appreciative of the fact that you were able to make the time today to help us kind of frame the conversation situated in this larger ongoing debate discussion about ethics and bring that and contextualize that to EIE. And finally, that's me. My name is Shreya. I'm the Research Uptake Coordinator at INEE and really happy to be supporting this effort today. Just very quickly with our webinar today, what we hope to do is showcase examples of meaningful engagement with research ethics in the EIE or humanitarian space more broadly. And we also want to propose practical recommendations for researchers, practitioners, and funders to adopt ethics into their way of working, including by highlighting some of the available ethics guidelines and tools already out there to shape our work. And before I hand it off to Ritesh to frame our session for us, I just want to take a moment to introduce the ERICC program, which is the Education Research in Conflict and Protracted Crisis. It is a research project that is working across 8 countries, and it has 3 sort of main components to it. The first 2 being on research production, really looking at rigorous research co-constructed with key stakeholders across the 8 countries and attempting to build an evidence base so that it can then go on to strengthen evidence-based program and policy. And this is where actually a lot of the reflections that both Catherine and Rabi will be pulling on will come from their experiences of conducting this research. INEE, as you can see, leads component 3 of the program, where we leverage our network and really try to make this research accessible and usable to all of our members in the EIE sector more broadly. And this webinar is an effort in that. And we also have component 4, which is led by the British Academy, through which we have 3 research chairs kind of closing this loop and helping build and strengthen capacity in global South research partners to then be able to sustain and continue this model of rigorous co-constructed research. So the experiences or the reflections that we will hear today in the webinar are very much drawn from all of these three components of the program, and we hope that it will serve researchers and practitioners in kind of coming together to build a more ethical EIE knowledge base. So I will pause there, and I'm very happy to hand over to Dr. Ritesh Shah to help us frame the webinar today and kind of give us an overview of where the overall discussion is and where we can build on with this webinar.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to everyone. And it's lovely to see so many of you already introducing yourself into the chat, and so that we get to know who is joining us here today. As Shreya has said, my name is Dr. Ritesh Shah. I'm based at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. Just really briefly, I'd like to provide some framing for today's webinar, which actually builds on a kind of long history now of work that INEE and others have been engaged in. And I want to actually go back to 2020 and specifically a statement that was released by the INEE Secretariat at that time, which affirmed its commitment to anti-racism and racial equity. And in it, the Secretariat acknowledged that, quote, "We are part of a global humanitarian system that, while holding good intentions for the world's most vulnerable, is implicitly colonial in nature," and, quote, "the ways in which it reinforces and perpetuates white supremacy culture and institutional racism through some of our structures and actions." And arguably, this extends to our data and evidence practices. So challenges persist in upholding ethical standards such as the inclusion and centering of perspectives of those with lived experiences of the issues that many of us are working on, safeguarding participants' rights, ensuring context-sensitive dissemination, and ultimately avoiding exploitation. And as a fellow researcher and colleague from New Zealand, Linda Tuwai-Smith, has aptly noted, like development in humanitarianism itself, research has often been used as a tool of colonization and oppression with a clear exploitation and sometimes weaponization of knowledge and evidence against people. Linda Tuwai-Smith highlights how for many in the Global South, they become objects of study rather than active participants and owners of knowledge. So INEE's Data and Evidence Summit, which was held in 2023, offered critical insights about some of these power dynamics and imbalances in our data and evidence ecosystem, particularly the unduly powerful role which funders play in shaping research agendas and interest, the inequitable research partnerships which exist between Global North and Southern researchers and partners, and insufficient accountability structures amongst us to really engender the changes we need. There was really a strong recognition that ethical practice needs to move beyond merely doing no harm to trying to redress legacies and ongoing histories of colonization and racism in our community. So ethical practice is about thinking about each step of the research process, from the design and conceptualization of it to its conduct, its dissemination and uptake to ensure the fair treatment of people in matters of knowledge, understanding, and participation. Only then might we achieve some semblance of what is known as epistemic justice, or the idea that there are multiple knowers and knowledge systems that we must amplify and engage with in our data and evidence work. Doing so requires constant, continuous learning and constant self-reflection into how we operate within this ecosystem. And one of the big challenges within our community is the question of accountability. And this is particularly true when it comes to ethics. Many of us who work in research institutions or large organizations may have ethical guidelines and practices, but they are often driven by concerns of risk to our own institutions rather than harm to participants themselves, or the way that we might engage with our research partners. So one of the big conclusions of the Data and Evidence Summit was that ultimately it is up to each of us to hold each other to account for such ethical behaviors and practices. This includes, for instance, funders when they engage in unethical practices and actions, and calling out such behaviors and actions for what they are. And so here I want to acknowledge the particular moment we find ourselves in. The recent gutting of the entire USAID program and significant cuts to the UK government's ODA have left many of us reeling from the devastation that has and will continue to be caused by such action. And in times of such scarcity, it might lead to some viewing conversations about research ethics as extraneous or superfluous to the immediate needs facing our community. But in fact, such actions by funders cut to the core of what ethical practice should be about, whether it is in research, programming, decision-making, or policy-making. Ethical practice is about prioritizing the needs, voices, experience, and expertise of affected communities. And as those involved in research and evidence gathering work, it is our obligation in these moments to double down on advocating for and amplifying the importance of this focus, rather than work to preserve a data and evidence ecosystem that does not work for so many. So recent research from ERICC, which Shreya introduced, has contributed insights to a growing body of evidence on ethical practices in research. These insights focus on strengthening ethical research at a structural level, such as in the conceptualization of research agendas, decisions that go into commissioning and shaping research projects by funding agencies, and the design of research methodologies and partnerships. So the intention of tonight's webinar is to showcase examples of meaningful engagement with these questions and dilemmas around research ethics in our education and emergencies community, to highlight ways that we can think ethically, but also some of the critical self-reflection of the challenges that remain. And so with that, I'm going to turn over to Catherine, who's going to kick us off to discuss her experience of one such set of dilemmas. Catherine.
Thank you very much, Ritesh and Shreya, for those introductions. I have to say that from the outset that I'm taking this one for the team. I'm speaking about a project that we have done collectively at the Center for Lebanese Studies around conducting research during the war. And I've been asked to talk very practically, so hopefully I'm able to translate some of these very big political issues, Ritesh, that you have introduced into also how we have been thinking about this in practice. The latest round of escalations of war from September 2024 in Lebanon was obviously not the beginning of the war, neither in Lebanon nor in the region. But here I will talk about research that we did during this specific period between September 2024 and November 2024. At that time, the Center for Lebanese Studies was already undertaking education research for ERICC under the title of crisis monitoring. And I want to sort of try to explain how we thought about this process and how we had to shift our minds a little bit about research during the war. Let me see if I can share my screen. I hope you can see this. It works?
Yes, all good.
Thank you. During the time when the war escalated, the Israeli aggressions escalated in September 2024, I think we all felt a bit of shock. We were overwhelmed by what was taking place. Colleagues and friends were deeply affected. People were displaced, losing homes. Some had relatives killed. in many ways, daily lives were turned upside down. People were hosting relatives and friends in cramped spaces, trying to work alongside. And the state of emergency and uncertainty, along with lack of sleep, concentration, and all the energy that was directed towards helping or surviving, made research feel strangely irrelevant at the outset. But as the general literature on conducting research in conflict has shown, there is a need to conduct the research during conflict to ensure that interventions reflect the rapidly changing conditions rather than relying on pre-war assumptions. So as a small research institution, in addition to our presence here in Lebanon, one of our advantages is that we can respond quickly to research needs. Also, flexibility from both ERICC and other funders at the time was essential for the possibility of responding rapidly. And by pooling resources, we could start to think about what kind of research we could conduct during this time. Let me see if I can change the... So some of the questions we were asking ourselves at this point was, what can we do as researchers in the midst of war? Can we and should we continue to conduct research? What kind of research should we conduct? What are the relevant questions to ask? And what are ethically sound practices for conducting research during conflict? At the time, the Ministry of Education and Higher Education, together with UNESCO, were developing an emergency plan to start a scholastic year. They developed a flexible modality with a combination of face-to-face and online education in the public school system. And talking to local responders, international organizations, and others engaged in the education sector, many called for more fine-grained data in the midst of a displacement crisis, with many schools turned into shelters. But at the same time, talking to teachers and families affected by war, there was no clear response to readiness to go back to school during war. So therefore, we decided to follow up our crisis monitoring research that we were already conducting with a rapid study to be able to understand this readiness to go back to school among teachers and families. The study ended up using quite conventional methods and approaches, as it was deemed most appropriate by the team. But conducting research during war is not easy. There were security concerns and there was a lot of mistrust among people affected. So I think we need to highlight that there is a need to deeply understand the specific context of war that we operate in. For example, the explosion of pagers and the level of intelligence that affected the dynamics of war created a very strong environment of fear, which meant giving personal information was experienced as putting oneself in danger. It was also the general trauma that many families had experienced, which we needed to be attentive to. And to bother people with questions when their needs were dire was not easy to plan for or to, justify. And finally, I think there's also a danger of deeper division between people as a result of war. And as researchers, we needed to pay attention to those impacts and how to ensure that our research would not aggravate any divisions. So how did we do this how do we integrate these ethical reflections into our research practice? At the Center for Lebanese Studies, we have developed a collective approach to institutional ethical approval, which hopefully goes beyond what Reuters talked about as sort of legal protection towards the institution itself. In our ethical procedures, we take contextualization as a key area. We engage in the ethical review process as an active learning and discussion on research ethics in the organization. And we strive for scholarship that is more directly situated in relational ethics than these traditional institutional review board processes. A relational ethics enables more emphasis on the wider historical, social, and political implications of research and knowledge production, as well as the types of relationship we develop in our research. We focus on what kind of relationship we do develop in our research, including, of course, the need to situate our positionalities as researchers in the research complex. So in this context, as Ritesh also talked about, the whole research process, including the research questions and the aims of the study, as well as the potential impacts of results of the study, is ideally part of the review. So the principles we developed were then closely connected with how we conducted the research in the end. So this was a rapid study because it was during war and we needed to, things were changing very rapidly and we needed to also collect information rapidly. And in many ways, we ended up with quite a conventional approach with document analysis, an online survey, qualitative interviews, informal conversations, and observations. So, which at the outset just looks like perhaps a standard study. But alongside those methodological choices, there were many practical decisions that we needed to make for the practical implementation of the study. And of course, here the paramount was safety and trust that we needed to maintain. We decided to interview only adults, not children. And one key decision was to use oral consent. No forms were used, which was important in the type of environment where a form can create alienation and fear. Having to sign something can that you're not quite sure what it is. There was no audio recordings of interviews, and sometimes notes were only taken after the interviews and conversations. It was extremely important to ensure anonymity of all people involved, of course. Another important dimension was to ensure safe spaces for both researchers and research participants. Creating safe spaces requires sensitivities, flexibility, and sometimes to decide that an interview may not go ahead. And safe spaces sometimes meant interviewing in people's homes, sometimes over the phone. And in the displaced shelters, where privacy is especially difficult to ensure, we opted to conduct more informal visits instead of formal interviews to reduce risks and maintain participants' comfort and safety. However, in some cases, the residents in the shelters actually prefer to sit down in groups to discuss the situation. And in this case, we also made notes. Another element was that researchers were known to the people. We collaborated with an existing network of community-based researchers who are our colleagues and who are already known to the communities, some working as teachers in those communities. We also had to consider what kind of knowledge we then could generate. Perhaps we were not able to always provide accurate transcripts. The conversational style and insight, though, created particular insights to the experience of war and the role of education in that context. We also did an online survey where no personal information was revealed and where the survey was distributed through known networks, like teachers, parents' unions, civil society, and others. Consent was here provided in the first question of the survey, and no personal data was linked to the form. There were obviously many challenges with this work. The ongoing conflict impacted our ability to secure geographically representative sample. The frequent displacements and security threats disrupted the reachability of respondents, and it reduced participation and completion rates for our online survey overall, and particularly in the areas most heavily affected by the aggressions, where people were following strict security measures. The online survey also limited our reachability to most vulnerable groups, including those without internet access. So this gap likely resulted in underrepresenting some of the most affected demographics, potentially skewing the overall understanding of needs and conditions that we found. However, through the qualitative interviews by community researchers and in shelters, we were able to make up for some of those weaknesses in the survey. Regarding the qualitative interviews, there was also, of course, challenges, and particularly in some of the shelters with the displacement center officials overlooking and overhearing conversations, etc., which might have restricted some people's ability to express their views freely, and that was never our intention to push people to say anything they were not comfortable with. I think it's also important, again, to emphasize that due to desperate need, parents wanted tangible outcome, and hence some were not interested to speak to anyone who could not improve their conditions directly. And this is always, of course, a very difficult dilemma for researchers. I also wanted to mention the rapidness of the study. The study was rapid and the situation not conducive to lengthy interviews, survey forms, etc., which meant that we had to prioritize which themes we addressed in the study, which meant we focused less on gender, for example. Also, we realized that even in the span of the few weeks that we were conducting the interviews, the fast evolving situation meant that the experience of and readiness of education changed among the people we were interviewing. That means that the outcome of the research needs to be very attentive to the kind of timing and the fast changing environment, which again, I think is very important for how we understand the experience of war and education. So just a final point that I wanted to address, considering that I've talked quite a lot about kind of practical aspects of the research. And that is something that we sometimes hear in studies on in the context of war is, do we compromise the quality of research when we're conducting research in such environments? And in many ways, I think this is maybe not the right question to ask. In some ways, it might be easy to draw that conclusion, that we lower the standards for our research in terms of representativity, formal interviewing with transcripts, etc. But perhaps it's more about tuning the appropriate questions and methods to the context in which we conduct research to ensure ethically sound research. For example, the informal conversations was as valuable as any formal interviews could be in this context. In this way, it's more, I think, about what knowledge and whose knowledge counts during war. And maybe we can kind of just final point say that in this way, research also is a social relation. As researchers, we're part of the context, and we need to contextualize and base those relations in that reality and create knowledge and generate knowledge based on that. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Catherine. There's one quick clarifying question before we go to Rabi, and then I think maybe others will have more substantive questions that they want to put into the Q&A. And this is from Ernest, who is asking the point that you made that researchers were known as research participants in the slide. And is my understanding that it's not that the researchers were research participants, but they were, maybe you can clarify that point.
Yeah, sorry, maybe it was a spelling mistake in the PowerPoint. I don't know. Yes, they were known to the research participants rather than us. But I mean, again, many of the we call them community researchers, but I don't know if that's a good term or not. But the point is that they were known, and I mean, many of them were teachers themselves and interviewing teachers. So it was also, of course, part of they were all part of the same reality in many ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I think that's useful. And Ernest, if your question hasn't been answered, you can ask a follow-up question in the Q&A following that. Thank you, Catherine. I think what we'll do is we'll move to Rabi now, but I'll encourage all of you to reflect on what Catherine shared, and particularly, I think that point at the end around research as a social relation, and any questions that you might have related to the work that was done in Lebanon in the midst of the recent conflict there. But we'll now turn to Rabi to share his experiences from research inside Syria. So Rabi, over to you.
Thank you very much. And thanks, Catherine. I just will continue with what Catherine ended with as research as social relation. Me as part of the Syrian Center for Policy Research and also working with ERICC project, I think we have a lot of experience in the last 14 years of conflict on how to engage with society while there is a situation that it is uncertain and it's the risk is very high for the people's lives to be part of any process, including the knowledge production. And I will start by highlighting a few key issues, I think, which is very important, and it combines together to suffocate knowledge production as we hope to. And before we look for the technical, ethical issues, I think we have to look for the political economy of knowledge production as an introduction to understand why we suffer in terms of knowledge production that it's useful for the society and countering the conflict dynamics. And the starting point, it's the conflict, and even now after the collapse of Assad regime in Syria, maybe I can give you in 1 minute the context. Now we have the Assad regime, which is the tyranny regime, continues. After the social movement, there is an attack on people, a smash to the social movement, and we have the complication of armed conflict during the last 14 years. The country divided before 3 months between 4 governments, 4 areas with 4 governance. So there is a huge fragmentation from all aspects. And there is a huge intervention from regional and international actors inside the country. So it's a fragmented country with huge security issues for the people inside and even for the Syrian outside as refugees who suffer from different constraints. After the collapse of the Assad regime, we have another challenge, which is the actor who controls the power is an extremist group, which the group, one of the fighting group during the conflict. Yet we have now a hope that we have a new start to establish new institutions, but the people are still under the fear that this can be a suppression process, this can be an exclusionary transformation from one tyrannist regime to another one with more impulse of ideology or lack of belief in democracy. So this is a huge uncertain with a space of hope for the people. As me, for example, I come to Syria after 11 years. So there is a space within the country, which is an important part of research and knowledge production to support people in this regard. So to bring this evidence for people. Having said that, I think there is many constraints, a big constraints, which I would call that knowledge suffocation, as many actors, internal and external actors, don't want to produce knowledge in specific themes. So this is the political direct interventions to suppress or suffocate the knowledge production in a theme that they considered sensitive or they don't want to invest in this. And this, of course, include the UN agencies. So we have a lot of, I would say, subordination to the key actors by researchers, by institutions, and sometimes by the UN agencies itself, which make us like focusing all of us on what the local and external actors want to invest in, while there's a lot of other important priorities which is excluded from this agenda of research. The second point is the fear, the using of fear, so which is not just removing themes or issues or priorities, but also distort the knowledge production and make it tailored or subordinated to what the key actors want. And of course, we can talk about many examples in Syria and in the region, how this knowledge production distorted and reproduced to use as, for example, to impose the agenda that this is an extremist group within extremist culture of the people. Those people are Christian and Muslims are fighting each other. And this is the map. And this is the framework. So we have a lot of self-evident knowledge production to prove that the key actors are right about their assumption about the region or about the people in this area, which is make a lot of this confusion about what's going on, because there is a lot of knowledge and there's a lot of information, but the people confused about what's the core issues. And the society understand this better than anybody from outside, because they feel that this is not the right approach to tackle issues like what's the causes of the conflict, for example. The third point is about the subordination for the fund and for the mainstream. Because if you want to counter an issue that it's very specific within the conflict context and you want to contextualize it, so you have to fight not only the people who suppress the energy production, you have also to have a struggle with the mainstream who believe that there is a key model to understand the economic dynamics or the education dynamics in the conflict context. Any other approach or any other understanding framework methodologies, so you are fighting the big schools in this regard or the supreme knowledge producers. The humanitarian issue is another one because there is a lot of focusing on the needs in the way that that you need to produce. So knowledge is not a priority. The priority is to bring services. And this is a problem for the civil society and for many of the people who work in the humanitarian sector. So they need some information to help services, not to help changing the social relations, improving the governance, increasing the solidarity within people. So the goal of knowledge is different because of the marketization of the humanitarian issue, the civil society who want to be a firm that produce services rather than being part of the struggle of the society. Having said this different constraints, I can give some examples about how the SCPR worked during this conflict. First, with the engagement of the community and the importance of use the knowledge, how we would use the knowledge within the conflict and in the post-conflict area, and then how to correct the whole process, like after we produce the knowledge and contact with the community, how we reassess the situation and disseminate the knowledge for the society, with the society. I think this is a small experience, but I think it's effective. One thing that Catherine said, for example, that we are part of the society. So we have researchers, which we have an equal partnership between what we call them, the people who are working from outside or the core team in the center, and with the people in every area in Syria. So we have this relation in terms of designing of the research until we do the analysis and disseminate it. So this is an internal importance of making the power relations correct within the research team, not doing hierarchy to start with from the beginning. The second thing is how to engage with the community, how to respect that this community is, for example, we have a research after the earthquake, and we have a research after the collapse of Assad regime. So many people don't want to talk at this point of time. So extracting knowledge at this time is not ethical, and many times it's biased. So it's very important to make sure that, okay, I will stop this until 2-3 weeks, 1 month, until the people really calm and want to talk about this and want to be part of this process of knowledge production. The other point is the relation with the community. As many consultants, researchers, private businesses who is working on knowledge production is going to make more awareness for the people. They want to tell the society how to organize and how to build and how to understand the situation. I think this is also the elite process of knowledge production, especially in the conflict area, especially with a lot of loss of human capacity because of the conflict. So researchers or knowledge producers think that they have to teach the community how to think, how to analyze, how to understand. I think avoiding that, it was for us a very important struggle, how to make ourselves part of this process, not on the top of it. And then talking to the people, for example, if the people are victims, and you can see after the collapse of Assad regime that journalists, researchers just take pictures, doing interviews with people who are like in prison for 30 years without any ethical consideration. They are really abuse people, abuse the situation, and make the conclusions as well. And unfortunately, this is very influential. This is very affecting the community and affecting the image for the people, especially now that people look for vision for the future. When we work with adolescents, we have like 6 months of preparations until we reach the point that those space to make sure that they are without any abuse. And I will, end here and to open for discussion how to disseminate, because before the collapse of Syrian for Assad regime, we couldn't bring the results to the community and make an open space for discussion because of the security issues. Now we are trying to bring this cycle to like bringing the result after the participatory research with the communities, bringing and other stakeholders can be part of this until we reach the point that they can find relevant solutions that assure their privacy, their respect, and make a solution that they contribute to. And I'll stop here for more questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Robbie. Really interesting discussion. And I'm just gonna make because there are a couple of really interesting questions in the Q&A, and I encourage others to kind of add some more questions in as well, please. I just want to pick up on a couple points that I think came out from actually both of your presentations. One is, I think, this importance in thinking about ethics, specifically about this notion of relationality and social relations, and how critical those social relations are to the importance of ethical research. And I think it's an interesting one because there is oftentimes a tension of this idea of having these relationships and this notion of objectivity, and how those things play a tension with each other. And I think for too long, perhaps, a lot of the research in education and emergencies has been kind of trapped by a very positivist view that as a researcher, you're totally neutral, you have no engagement, you don't know anyone, everyone's anonymous. And I think what both of you highlighted is actually the opposite, right? The importance of those relations and connections, and that's critical to acting ethically. So that's one point. The other point, which I think is really interesting, and I think both of you touched on it in different ways, is this question of the purpose of research and how research is being used in different times and moments. And so, Robbie, you really touched on kind of both the instrumentalization and the politicization of research. And so we presume that research is ideally trying to solve a problem of some kind, but it may help to reproduce a problem. It may reproduce a kind of standard narrative. And even that question of should research be problem solving or should research be problem posing, right? Do we have a responsibility to actually ask questions maybe that aren't being asked otherwise? And I think you were asking that to some degree, Ravi, and saying there's this need to kind of for research to kind of influence and shape services immediately, but you're also saying, but what's getting left out when we focus on that exclusively? So I think that those are both interesting kind of reflections that came out for me as I was listening to you both. And maybe you want to pick up on these things in your reflections back. But I just thought there's a couple of questions in here that you might want to respond to. In terms of one question, which is being asked, is what are the mechanisms that we as researchers and funding bodies and others ensure that during moments of war and crisis where mistrust, misinformation, disinformation is potentially being spread like wildfire, that evidence and research that we are engaged in generating is maybe serving to counter that. And do you have a view on that? And Robbie, I think you were saying that sometimes actually research is used to help spread the disinformation. So then how do you counter that as well? So Catherine and Robbie, what reflections you have?
It's the big question in many ways. I mean, I guess one of the things that we felt where we could play a role was in a way to kind of nuance some of the understandings. And also, I mean, there's all these different discourses that are playing out at the same, and different interests. And I think that in the kind of, I don't know if you want to call it an emergency, but in the war situation that where you have, there's a lot of rumors, there's a lot of fear, and then there's a lot of different actors who are putting a lot of interest into promoting a particular agenda. But when it comes to the kind of the daily experiences of the crisis and how people actually coped with it on a daily basis and what they needed, I guess we felt that we could play a role in also understanding that better in a way, and what were the needs, and whether the aid organizations who were, you know, as Rabia said, were sort of doing service delivery, we're actually meeting some of the, you know, understanding some of those particular experiences that people had. So I guess that doesn't quite answer your question. I mean, we were also trying with some of our disability work to do information campaigns and other for people to understand, you know, where can you get help, what is the help, what, you know, there are. So maybe that could also help, but it sometimes disappears, I think, in all this and just becomes one of many of the other information flows. So I guess those ways, and also we tried to meet with some of the kind of main actors, and we met with, you know, groups to discuss the results, etc., which was maybe more efficient than trying to shout as loud as everyone else in that situation. So I guess. And that's where I think that, you know, your other issue about objectivity, you know, if you kind of try to do a more engaged scholarship, I'm thinking that it's, I'm very sorry, but I'm disturbed by getting coffee. Thank you. I think if you take the position of engaged scholarship, you can engage more at that level, and as I said, on the more social relational perspective. So maybe that's where you can, because I think it's hard for a small institution alone to kind of control a lot of the information flow. I don't know if that answers, but I guess that's how we felt we could make a difference, was really to also understand some of the nuances and the more qualitative differences in experiences.
Robbie, do you have some reflections on this question?
Yeah, I think it's very important to see. First, I will reflect with your first two comments as well. In terms of the relations, I think it's very important, the partnership with the society, with the community. And since we are working on knowledge production, for example, in education or humanitarian aspects, so I think the engagement and partnership will make the trust better within the production of knowledge and with the dissemination, because this is a production of a community who are trying to build posing or solving. I mean, both. I think it's a value added. So, but how to avoid that we are not having our agenda or our bias without any accountability? I think what we try to do to bring different people to the table, different people as researchers. So we don't depend on one researcher on a specific area. So always we try to make our team as varied as we can, of course, with the same ethical background, but with different political, cultural background as well, to make sure that we are not bringing the story based on our imagination or our interest. So this is kind of check and balance that we can do it. We tried many times, and how to study each area with different researchers, different interviews, different suggestions for key informants, etc. For I will say, yes, small centers are small centers, but I think independent small centers will make the people interested in the results. This is our experience, not in the first year or two, later on, because the people start to see that there is a credible research, or this is a credible result that we want to use. But of course, and since you are not controlling the media and or the big knowledge production, these small independent entities, I think it's influential, since it's touch what the people and society think. It's more close to them. But this to know where is the source of knowledge.
We might have just lost Robbie, sounds like. Oh, are you back, Robbie? Sorry, your connection slowed down for a second. Did you want to finish what you were going to say?
Yeah, I just finished. I'm sorry, because this is the communication is the connection is not that good. Sorry for that.
No, I mean, I think we got most of what you were saying in terms of the internal checks and balances. And actually, I this is maybe something I wanted to ask both of you about a bit more, and very intrigued, particularly Catherine, by what you were saying in CLS you are doing in terms of your own ethics process. And you were talking about this kind of collective approach to thinking about ethics. And Robbie, it sounds actually in your small group, you're also thinking about this. You're thinking about it in terms of what are the different politics of representation amongst our team? How are we kind of ensuring that as a research team together, we're not falling into these biases and traps, and we're also bringing diverse perspectives and views on this. So I don't know, did you two want to just quickly touch on that process a bit? Because I think it's quite important. Robbie, you want to go first?
Yes, sure. Yeah, it's not that we have to include all the political backgrounds and all the cultural background. I think there's two core issues: the ethical issues, that the people are believe in the values that we are believe in. I mean, we don't need to go through that. And they are professional. They work as knowledge producer in the highest level. So I think this is the only two conditions. Rather than that, the variety of positionality is very important, but not including all positionalities. So we don't mistrust our researchers, but we need to make it as varied as we can. But this is not a parliament to make everybody representative. It is trying to be as much as you can inclusive in this regard, to make sure that when you have a mistake or you have a bias. So yeah, it's something like you want to be varied, but not to be the representative of the community. Yeah.
Probably impossible to do anyway.
Yes. Yes.
All right. And Catherine, any quick thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, thanks for saying that, Rabi. I think it's very important. And I mean, it's hard. You know, it's hard to get everything right all the time, and I think what our, you know, having the opportunity to do this ethical review process internally, and as more as a process, and to make it a part of the learning process, it is also to be able to address, you know, questions of positionality, you know, relationality, power relations, as they also come up in the way, because it's also something that's changing, and particularly in the context of war and violence, you know, these things are not static, and things are changing. So I think that's very important. But also, as you said, for us it was important to move away from ethics just as a kind of box ticking exercise, but really to think more of it as a very integral part of our conduct as researchers and with engaged scholarship. So I think for us that was a huge opportunity to do that. But that means that we can never stop talking about ethics as well. It really need to be there at the forefront of the work we're doing all the time.
And I think that's actually a really good point to end on, Catherine, because I think that's exactly some of the points that I think I'm hearing us collectively raising, that ethics isn't a one-time thing that you do, that you tick off and then you kind of move on, that it should be kind of embedded throughout the research process. So I'm looking at the time and noting that we are almost at time, and I just wanted to indicate that there are, I think, some ongoing conversations that are going to be happening in this space. And specifically, and I'll ask Shreya to share a slide with some of this information in a second, is that the ERICC Research Consortium, in partnership with INEE, is really hoping to continue some of this dialogue, and is already and will continue to release some blogs in the coming period about some of these questions. The first of these, which is on the role of researchers in moving ethical practice forward, which is really kind of the focus of our discussion today, has been released today. And you can see that it's up on the INEE website, and I think Eamon's posted a link to the general INEE website, but maybe we can get the direct link to that post as well. Just to highlight that some of the key points of that first blog that we've heard today is: one, we need to anticipate ethical challenges ahead of time. Two, we need to build in opportunities for peer support and structured reflection throughout. Three, we need towards building genuine research collaborations. Four, we need to engage with local knowledge systems in context. Five, be transparent with our methodology, ethical considerations, and research limitations, as well as failures, and be honest about that in any research report. And six, ensure that the dissemination and uptake work takes into account the political sensitivities and need for reciprocity. And I think actually both Ravi and Catherine have done an amazing job of kind of touching on all six of these points in different ways through their presentations. So really thank you to both Ravi and Catherine for sharing those insights. And I hope that all of you who are on this will continue to engage with these questions as we move forward. But for now, wishing all of you a good day, good evening, good morning, wherever you are, I guess. Shreya, anything else to say from your end?
Nothing else, just appreciation for the great conversation. Thank you all for engaging through the Q&A and the chat. And we will share back the recording and any other resources with you via follow-up. So thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
And thank you for staying up so late. Oh, okay, he left. Bye.